The 1895 portrait hung in the quiet gallery, a picture of calm dignity. It showed a woman dressed in the style of the late 19th century, with a high lace collar and a serious yet gentle expression. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, and her hands, adorned with a simple ring, rested gracefully in her lap. The artist had captured every detail with care: the soft folds of her velvet dress, the delicate blush on her cheeks, even the subtle sheen in her eyes. It was the kind of painting people walked past and admired for its beauty, a perfect example of its time, unassuming and elegant. Most visitors saw a lovely piece of history, nothing more. But if you looked closer, much closer, at the very deep background, beyond the finely painted curtains and the hint of a garden through a distant window, there was something else, a faint blur, a smudge of dark color that didn't quite fit. It was easy to miss, often dismissed as a trick of the light, perhaps a flaw in the old canvas, or just an area where the artist hadn't been as precise. It was just a shadow, people would think, and move on. Dr. Evelyn Reed, however, wasn't one to move on so quickly. She was an art historian, sharp and thorough, with a special focus on portraits from that exact period. Her office was a neat stack of books and research papers, her mind a library of dates, styles, and forgotten artists. Evelyn first encountered the portrait during a routine check of the museum's collection. She was updating records, making sure everything was catalogued correctly. The painting, listed simply as Portrait of a Lady, was beautiful, yes, but it was that tiny, indistinct area in the background that caught her eye. At first, she tried to ignore it. It was probably nothing. A century-old painting would naturally have some imperfections. But the longer she looked, the more it bothered her. It wasn't just a random smudge. There was a shape to it, a suggestion of something intentional. It was like a faint whisper in a silent room, barely audible but impossible to completely ignore. Evelyn, who usually dealt with facts and clear brushstrokes, found herself feeling a growing discomfort. It was a tiny itch in her academic brain, a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. She tried to rationalize it away, telling herself it was just her imagination, or perhaps the way the varnish had aged. But the feeling persisted, a quiet insistence that something was off. This wasn't just an art historical question anymore. It was becoming a personal challenge. She decided to investigate. Her first steps were standard. She used a high-powered magnifying glass, carefully tracing the edges of the blur. She adjusted the gallery lights, trying different angles, hoping to make the shape clearer. Under direct light, it seemed to recede. In shadow, it deepened, hinting at something more. She even tried a portable UV lamp, a trick that sometimes revealed old repairs or hidden signatures. Nothing. The blur just remained, stubbornly undefined, a frustrating ghost on the canvas. These methods, usually so reliable, failed her. Her scientific, logical approach was hitting a wall. Instead of clarifying the issue, it only made her more intrigued and more uneasy. The painting started to have a strange effect on her. When she was alone in the gallery, working late, she sometimes felt a chill, a sense of being watched. She would glance up, convinced she saw the woman in the portrait's eyes follow her, or that the faint background blur had shifted. She knew it was silly, just her mind playing tricks, fueled by her own curiosity. But the feeling was real enough to make her pause, to make her question what she thought she knew about this seemingly calm piece of art. The painting was no longer just an object. It was something that held a secret, and it was slowly drawing her in. Finally, Evelyn decided to take a bigger step. Standard tools weren't enough. She arranged for a high-resolution digital scan of the portrait. This was a more involved process, requiring careful handling and specialized equipment, but she was determined. She wanted to see every single thread, every layer of paint, every possible detail the artist had laid down. The technicians carefully set up the scanner, a large, precise machine that would capture an incredible amount of data. Evelyn watched, a knot of anticipation in her stomach. She told herself she was just looking for a tiny repair, a hidden signature, anything that would explain the blur. But deep down, she knew she was looking for something more. The scanning process took several hours. When the initial results came back, projected onto a large screen in the conservation lab, Evelyn leaned forward, her heart beating a little faster. The blur was still there, but now, with the incredible detail the scan provided, it wasn't quite as amorphous. There was a hint of structure within the indistinct mass, a subtle curve, a faint line that suggested an edge, perhaps a contour. It wasn't a clear image, not yet, but it was enough to confirm her growing suspicion. This wasn't just a smudge. This was something deliberate, something hidden, and the realization, instead of bringing clarity, only deepened the unsettling mystery. Evelyn, now completely convinced that the blur was more than just an artifact, knew she needed to go further. Standard digital scans were good, but they had their limits. She needed specialized help, people who could push the boundaries of digital enhancement and restoration. She contacted a team known for their work on damaged historical documents and faded photographs, explaining her unusual request. They were intrigued, though a bit skeptical at first. They agreed to take on the project, using their advanced algorithms to try and clarify what the initial scan had only hinted at. The process was painstaking. Evelyn spent days with the digital restoration experts, watching them work. They used sophisticated software designed to separate layers of paint to virtually remove the effects of aging and discoloration, and to adjust light and shadow in ways that would be impossible with the physical painting. They experimented with different filters, trying to bring out hidden details, to make the fuzzy areas sharp. It was like trying to solve a puzzle where most of the pieces were missing, and the ones you had were warped. Slowly, pixel by pixel, the indistinct shape in the background began to take on a more defined form. Evelyn felt a growing sense of dread mixed with an almost obsessive anticipation. Each tiny adjustment, each subtle enhancement, brought them closer to whatever secret the artist had buried within the canvas. Then came the moment of revelation. After hours of careful work, one of the technicians made a final tweak to an algorithm designed to enhance faint outlines. Suddenly, with chilling clarity, the amorphous blur resolved itself. On the large monitor, behind the serene figure of Lady Annalise Beaumont, a second face materialized. It was gaunt, almost spectral, its features sharp and drawn. The eyes, dark and sunken, seemed to pierce through the digital image, holding an expression that was a disturbing mix of intense suffering and profound malice. It was undeniably a human face, hidden in plain sight for over a century. Evelyn gasped, a cold shiver running down her spine. The contrast was stark, almost unbearable. The foreground showed a dignified, beautiful woman, radiating composure and grace, and behind her, lurking in the shadows of the background, was this horrifying presence. It wasn't just a face. It was a ghost, an echo of something terrible. Her initial reaction was pure shock, followed by a wave of disbelief. She leaned closer to the screen, trying to find an explanation, a trick of the light, anything to make it go away. But it was there, undeniably real, meticulously rendered, just as the main portrait was. The dread she had felt earlier intensified, becoming a heavy, suffocating weight. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. She stared at the newly revealed face, trying to absorb its details. It appeared to be male, older than Lady Annalise, with a prominent brow and a thin, downturned mouth. The expression was the most unsettling part, a silent scream or a look of pure, concentrated hatred. Evelyn immediately understood the implication. This was no accident. No artist would accidentally create such a detailed and disturbing image in the background of a commissioned portrait. It had to be a conscious choice, a deliberate act of concealment. But why? Why would an artist, known for his refined portraits, hide something so grotesque, so terrifying, within an otherwise beautiful and elegant piece? The question gnawed at her, pulling her deeper into the painting's mystery. Evelyn spent the next few days trying to make sense of what she had found. She tried to find similar hidden elements in other works by Elias Thorne, the artist. She went through catalogues, museum records, and art history texts, looking for any mention of Thorne employing such a technique. She even looked at works by his contemporaries, wondering if this was a forgotten artistic trend, but her research yielded nothing. Thorne's other known works were straightforward, elegant, and entirely devoid of any such disturbing surprises. This discovery was unique, an anomaly that made the portrait even more unsettling. It emphasized the singular, almost personal nature of this hidden image. The painting began to exert a more pronounced psychological effect on her. The initial unease she had felt now morphed into something more persistent, more invasive. She found herself having vivid, disturbing nightmares where the gaunt face from the portrait would float in the darkness, its eyes fixed on her. During the day, even when she was away from the museum, she felt a constant, nagging sensation of being watched, of being followed. Every shadow seemed to hold a fleeting glimpse of that spectral visage. She knew it was probably just stress, the intensity of the discovery playing tricks on her mind, but the feeling was so pervasive, so real, that she started to question her own sense of reality. The portrait wasn't just an object of study anymore. It was a presence, a secret keeper that had finally begun to reveal its dark truth, and in doing so, had started to unravel Evelyn's own peace of mind. The mystery was no longer just academic. It had become deeply personal, seeping into her waking thoughts and her dreams. She knew she couldn't stop now. She had to find out why. Evelyn understood she had to dig deeper, beyond the canvas itself. Her next step was to immerse herself in the lives of the key figures, Elias Thorne, the artist, and Lady Annalise Beaumont, the subject of the portrait. She began by sifting through museum archives, historical society records, and old aristocratic family registries. Thorne, Evelyn understood she had to dig deeper, beyond the canvas itself. Her next step was to immerse herself in the lives of the key figures: Elias Thorne, the artist, and Lady Annalise Beaumont, the subject of the portrait. She began by sifting through museum archives, historical society records, and old aristocratic family registries. Thorne, a respected portraitist of his time, was known for his meticulous detail and a somewhat reclusive nature. Lady Annalise Beaumont, on the other hand, was a prominent socialite, often mentioned in society columns for her beauty and grace. Initially, Evelyn found nothing overtly scandalous or unusual in their public lives that could explain the hidden face. Their biographies were fairly straightforward, painting a picture of typical 19th-century artist and patron relationships, albeit with a touch of Thorne's rumored eccentricity. However, Evelyn wasn't one to be satisfied with superficial details. She expanded her search, delving into less frequented archives, local historical societies, and dusty newspaper clippings from the region where the Beaumont estate was located. It was in these obscure records that she began to uncover whispers, not of grand scandals, but of local legends and folklore surrounding the Beaumont family. The estate itself, a sprawling manor nestled deep in the countryside, seemed to have its own share of dark tales. Old newspaper articles, often sensationalized, spoke of strange occurrences, unexplained disappearances, and a pervasive sense of dread that locals associated with the property. These weren't front-page news, but rather small, often overlooked pieces, sometimes tucked away in the local interest sections, hinting at a history far more troubled than any official record suggested. A recurring theme started to emerge from these fragmented accounts: the disappearance of Lady Annalise's younger brother, Arthur Beaumont. The records indicated that Arthur had vanished several years before the portrait was painted, when he was still a young man. Officially, his disappearance had been ruled an accident, perhaps a hunting mishap, or even a runaway case, as he was known to be a bit wild and rebellious. But the local whispers, preserved in the faded ink of old articles, and the oral histories Evelyn painstakingly transcribed, told a different story. They spoke of Arthur being taken by the woods, or claimed by the house itself, hinting at something far more sinister than a simple accident. There was a sense that the family had quickly moved to suppress any further investigation, and the local authorities, perhaps influenced by the Beaumonts' power and prestige, had been all too willing to close the case. Evelyn's heart pounded as she looked at a blurry, sepia-toned photograph of Arthur Beaumont found in an old society journal. He was a handsome young man, with a striking resemblance to Lady Annalise, but with a wilder, more intense gaze. And then she saw it, the chilling familiarity. The hidden face in the portrait, once a gaunt, spectral image, now bore an unmistakable, horrifying resemblance to the young Arthur. The prominent brow, the downturned mouth, the very structure of the face, all aligned with the faded image before her. It wasn't just a face, it was his face. The realization sent a cold shiver down her spine, confirming her deepest fears and suspicions. The hidden image wasn't some abstract symbol of suffering. It was a ghost, a specific person trapped within the canvas. Driven by this shocking discovery, Evelyn redoubled her efforts to understand Thorne's connection to the Beaumont estate. Why would he paint a portrait with Arthur's hidden image? Was he aware of the circumstances surrounding Arthur's disappearance? Through further digging into Thorne's personal effects, auction records, and even obscure travel logs, Evelyn made another critical find. Thorne, a man who typically preferred to work in the solitude of his London studio, had indeed spent a brief, unexplained period at the Beaumont estate. The dates were vague, but they coincided roughly with the period following Arthur's disappearance and preceding the commissioning of Lady Annalise's portrait. His presence there was unusual, a deviation from his established routine, and it solidified Evelyn's suspicion that Thorne knew far more than he had ever publicly admitted. This wasn't merely an artist capturing a patron's likeness. This was an artist deeply entwined with the family's secrets, a silent observer of a tragedy. The theory began to coalesce in Evelyn's mind, forming a disturbing narrative. The portrait wasn't just a likeness of Lady Annalise. It was a silent confession, a profound warning, or perhaps even an act of subtle rebellion. Thorne, a man with an artistic sensitivity and a rumored fascination with hidden truths, had likely witnessed something terrible during his stay at the Beaumont estate. He might have been privy to the dark circumstances surrounding Arthur's disappearance, perhaps even implicating Lady Annalise herself. Tormented by what he knew, and perhaps unable or unwilling to speak out directly, Thorne had embedded the truth within the canvas. The hidden face became a spectral echo of Arthur's lost presence, forever bound to his sister, a perpetual reminder of a secret that the artist believed deserved to be revealed. It was a desperate plea for justice, a silent cry from the canvas, waiting for someone to look closely enough to see beyond the serene facade and finally uncover the truth. The painting, once an object of beauty, now seemed to pulse with the weight of a terrible secret, a testament to a hidden tragedy yearning to be brought into the light. Evelyn felt a profound sense of responsibility, knowing she was the one who had finally heard its whispers. Evelyn knew she needed more. The hidden face, Thorne's cryptic notes, the local whispers, they all pointed to a dark truth, but she lacked the hard evidence. Her next step was clear: the Beaumont family archives. Gaining access was a bureaucratic nightmare, involving endless forms, cautious museum directors, and the lingering, almost protective silence of the few remaining Beaumont descendants. But Evelyn was relentless. She argued for historical preservation, for academic integrity, for the full story of a significant piece of art. Eventually, with a blend of persistence and a carefully worded appeal to the family's pride, she secured limited access to their private collection, housed in a rarely opened wing of their ancestral manor. The archives were a testament to generations of accumulation and neglect. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the heavy curtains, illuminating shelves crammed with leather-bound ledgers, brittle deeds, and faded photographs. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and forgotten lives. Evelyn spent days sifting through the disarray, her gloved hands carefully turning pages that hadn't seen the light of day in decades. Most of it was mundane: household accounts, property records, social invitations. But she was searching for something else, something hidden, something personal. Her persistence finally paid off in a small, unassuming study, tucked away behind a larger library. She found an old mahogany desk, its surface scarred with age, pushed into a corner. As she ran her hand along its smooth, dark wood, her fingers brushed against a small, almost invisible seam. It was a hidden compartment, cleverly designed to blend into the desk's ornate carvings. Her heart pounded as she pried it open. Inside, nestled amongst dried rose petals and a few tarnished silver coins, lay a small, leather-bound journal. It felt ancient, heavy with secrets. The journal belonged to Arthur Beaumont. Evelyn's hands trembled as she opened it, the pages brittle and yellowed with time. Arthur's handwriting, though sometimes hurried, was clear and surprisingly eloquent. The entries, dated from the months leading up to his disappearance, painted a picture of a young man increasingly isolated and afraid. He wrote of growing paranoia, of feeling watched within his own home. He mentioned a shadow in the house, an oppressive presence that seemed to follow him. There were cryptic references to a family member's malice, a coldness that chills the blood, and a darkness that seeks to consume. He never named names, but the dread in his words was palpable. He spoke of overheard conversations, of hushed whispers behind closed doors, and a growing certainty that his life was in danger. The journal detailed his attempts to escape, his plans to run away, but also his fear of being caught. Then abruptly, the entries stopped. The final sentence was a chilling, unfinished thought. "They know I know, and now she is coming for me with that look in her eyes." The one that says, the sentence ended there, a stark, terrifying void that spoke volumes of a sudden, violent end. Reading Arthur's journal, Evelyn felt a profound sense of sorrow and mounting anger. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, forming a picture far more sinister than she had imagined. The coldness, the darkness, the she in Arthur's final entry, it all pointed to Lady Annalise. Evelyn revisited her research on the subject of the portrait. Her serene composure, once admired for its aristocratic grace, now seemed like a carefully constructed mask, hiding a terrible secret and perhaps a profound, gnawing guilt. The hidden face in the portrait was not just Arthur. It was a manifestation of Annalise's own torment, a constant, silent accusation etched into the very fabric of her public image. Thorne, the artist, had captured not just her outward beauty, but the hidden truth of her soul, the burden of her complicity. Her suspicions about Lady Annalise's involvement were further solidified by veiled references in other family documents. Annalise had quickly taken over Arthur's inheritance. Despite his age, and several financial transactions around that time seemed unusually swift and secretive. There were also letters from distant relatives expressing concern about Arthur's sudden and unexplained absence, concerns that Annalise had quickly dismissed with vague explanations of his adventurous spirit. It was clear she had orchestrated a cover-up, silencing any questions and cementing her control. Then, tucked within the pages of Arthur's journal, Evelyn found it, a thin, folded piece of paper, brittle with age. It was a letter, unsigned, but undeniably in Thorne's distinctive hand, the artist's final, desperate testimony. He wrote of his horror, of witnessing a terrible act, though he again avoided explicit details, perhaps out of fear for his own life. He alluded to Lady Annalise's direct involvement in Arthur's disappearance, her cold ruthlessness, her power within the family. Thorne confessed his inability to speak out, citing threats and the overwhelming influence of the Beaumont family. He wrote of his torment, his sleepless nights, and his desperate need to leave a mark, a truth that would one day be uncovered. "I cannot speak with my voice," the letter read, "but my brush will speak for me. The truth will be seen by those who truly look." He chose to immortalize the truth in his art, a silent act of defiance, a desperate plea for recognition of the victim, Arthur, whose spirit he believed would never rest. The hidden face in the portrait was more than just an image. It was Thorne's confession, Arthur's ghost, and Annalise's eternal condemnation, all woven into the canvas, waiting for Evelyn to finally bring it to light. As Evelyn delved deeper into the truth, confirming her darkest suspicions about the Beaumont tragedy, the painting itself seemed to react, its unsettling effects intensifying day by day. Reports from museum staff, initially dismissed as mere superstition or overactive imaginations, grew more frequent and more disturbing. Curators working near the canvas complained of flickering lights in the usually stable exhibition hall. Technicians reported unexplained cold spots that defied the museum's carefully controlled climate system, always localized around the portrait. Security guards on night duty spoke of faint, almost imperceptible whispers, like a sigh carried on a phantom breeze, heard when the halls were utterly empty. Each incident, minor on its own, added to a growing sense of dread that clung to the portrait like a shroud. The hidden face, now undeniably identified as Arthur, seemed to shift subtly in the background. Its eyes, previously just an outline, now appeared to follow observers, a deep, sorrowful gaze that felt impossibly real. Its expression, once just gaunt, deepened with an unsettling mix of sorrow and anger, as if the torment Thorne had captured was now actively manifesting. Evelyn herself felt the shift most acutely. Her nightmares, once sporadic and unsettling, became vivid and terrifying. She would wake in a cold sweat, the pleas of a tormented Arthur echoing in her ears, his spectral form reaching out to her from the darkness. Interspersed with these were visions of Annalise, her cold, aristocratic gaze fixed on Evelyn, a silent, chilling warning. The line between historical investigation and personal haunting began to blur, threatening her sanity. She found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, convinced she was being watched. Fleeting glimpses of a shadowy figure in her peripheral vision became almost commonplace. The faint, cloying scent of decay, like old flowers left too long, would suddenly fill her office, only to vanish moments later. Her rational, academic mind, so accustomed to concrete facts and logical deductions, struggled to cope with these increasingly subjective and terrifying experiences. She was being haunted, not just by history, but by the very spirits of the past she had so meticulously unearthed. Driven by a desperate need for external validation, and perhaps a small irrational hope for resolution, Evelyn reluctantly contacted a renowned paranormal investigator. Dr. Alistair Finch was a man of science, but one who had dedicated his life to the scientific study of the unexplained. He was known for his rigorous methodology and his skepticism, which made him all the more credible. Evelyn, a staunch academic, found it difficult to admit her experiences, but the increasing intensity of the phenomena left her with no other choice. Finch arrived with an array of specialized equipment: electromagnetic field detectors, thermal cameras, and highly sensitive audio recorders. His initial skepticism was palpable, a polite but firm belief that everything could be explained by mundane causes. He spent hours meticulously scanning the painting and its immediate surroundings, recording data, and interviewing museum staff. But then, as he conducted his own solitary investigations near the portrait, things began to change. He reported sudden, inexplicable drops in temperature that his thermal camera couldn't rationalize. His EMF detectors spiked erratically, indicating strong electromagnetic fluctuations that had no discernible source. On one occasion, a sensitive audio recorder picked up a faint, almost inaudible whisper, a sound that sent a chill down his spine, even through the noise-canceling headphones. Finch's initial skepticism gave way to genuine alarm. He witnessed phenomena directly linked to the portrait that defied his scientific explanations. A heavy antique clock in the gallery chimed 13 times, its gears visibly turning, despite being unwound. A framed photograph on a nearby table slowly slid off its stand and shattered on the floor without anyone touching it. These were not the subtle whispers Evelyn had experienced. These were undeniable physical manifestations. After days of intense investigation, Dr. Finch presented his findings to a shaken Evelyn. He confirmed her deepest fears. The painting, he concluded, was not just a historical artifact, it was a vessel, a conduit for a tormented spirit. Arthur's spirit, trapped and unable to rest due to the injustice of his death and the concealment of the truth, used the hidden image as a direct channel to communicate his suffering. The constant manifestations, the cold spots, the whispers, the shifting expressions, these were not random occurrences. They were Arthur's desperate attempts to be seen, to be heard, to finally expose the truth that had been buried for so long. The portrait had become a focal point for a lingering, malevolent presence, feeding on the darkness of its past, a constant echo of the tragedy it silently depicted. It was clear now that the painting needed more than just academic study. It needed something to quiet the restless spirit it contained. Confronting the undeniable evidence, Evelyn and Dr. Finch understood that traditional historical methods wouldn't suffice. The painting wasn't just a document of the past. It was actively experiencing it. They decided on a risky, almost desperate measure, a controlled séance. Their aim was not to conjure spirits in a theatrical display, but to open a channel of communication to finally bring peace to Arthur Beaumont. They hoped a direct plea or acknowledgement might quell the unrest that radiated from the canvas. The atmosphere in the deserted gallery was heavy, thick with anticipation and an undercurrent of dread. Finch, ever the scientist, had set up his equipment to record every fluctuation, every sound, every change in temperature, hoping to capture empirical data from this extraordinary event. Evelyn, on the other hand, felt a profound sense of resignation mixed with a chilling resolve. She had come too far to turn back now. As the investigator began the ritual, speaking softly, almost formally, inviting Arthur's spirit to communicate, the air around the portrait grew perceptibly colder. Evelyn shivered, pulling her shawl tighter, though the cold felt like it was coming from inside her bones. The room, lit only by a few carefully placed, low-wattage lamps, seemed to press in on them. Then, without warning, the controlled environment shattered. A sudden, violent gust of wind ripped through the enclosed gallery, though every window and door was securely shut. Papers scattered from Finch's desk, rustling wildly across the floor like frightened birds. A heavy, antique vase, which had stood undisturbed on a pedestal for decades, suddenly toppled, crashing to the marble floor with a deafening sound. The lights in the gallery flickered, then died completely, plunging them into near-total darkness, save for the emergency lights that cast long, grotesque shadows. A chilling, guttural scream echoed through the room, a sound that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the building, vibrating in Evelyn's chest. It was not Arthur's voice, she instinctively knew, but something far more ancient and malevolent. It was a scream of pure rage and defiance, a desperate attempt to silence them. Evelyn fumbled for her flashlight, her hand trembling. When the beam finally cut through the gloom, it landed on the portrait. The hidden face in the background, which had always been subtle, now seemed to leap out from the canvas. It was grotesquely distorted, stretched and twisted into a mask of pure agony and fury. Its eyes, previously just dark smudges, now burned with an unearthly phosphoric glow, fixed directly on them. It was no longer just an image. It was a living, breathing entity, pulsating with malevolent energy. The presence wasn't just Arthur. There was a darker, more powerful force at play, fiercely protecting the secret. Perhaps Annalise's own tormented spirit, still clinging to her deception even in death. Amidst the chaos, fragmented images began to manifest, not just in their minds, but visibly in the air. A shimmering, translucent scene played out before their eyes, like a warped, silent film. They saw a young man, undeniably Arthur, struggling, his face contorted in fear. Then a figure emerged from the shadows, elegant and cold, with a familiar, serene face that Evelyn now recognized as Lady Annalise. Her eyes, in this ghostly manifestation, held no serenity, only a chilling, unfeeling gaze. There was a swift, brutal movement, a flash of something metallic, and then Arthur's form crumpled. The full horror of what transpired was laid bare, not through dusty documents or whispered legends, but through a visceral, spiritual experience that bypassed all logic and went straight to their souls. It was a betrayal, a murder, orchestrated by the very woman who had commissioned the portrait. The painting seemed to absorb the unleashed energy, drawing it in like a sponge. The canvas itself appeared to ripple, the colors deepening, the shadows growing more profound. It had become a truly terrifying object, radiating an aura of dread that was palpable, almost suffocating. Evelyn felt a crushing weight in the air, a sense of despair so profound it stole her breath. The hidden face was no longer just an image. It was a gateway, a portal to a realm of suffering, perpetually replaying the tragedy it had been created to conceal. Its burning eyes seemed to draw them in, threatening to pull them into the canvas itself, to become part of its unending torment. The séance had failed to bring peace. Instead, it had ripped open a wound, unleashing the full, unbridled power of the painting and the dark history it contained. They had sought answers, and the answers had nearly consumed them. The next step was not about understanding the painting, but about containing it. The museum, reeling from the catastrophic events of the séance, quickly moved to contain the fallout. The official story was carefully crafted: an unexpected power surge, equipment malfunction, and a minor structural issue in the exhibition hall. No mention was made of the unearthly screams, the flying objects, or the terrifying visual manifestations that had left Evelyn and the paranormal investigator shaken to their cores. The director, a pragmatic man who had always prided himself on the institution's scientific rigor, now wore a haunted look in his eyes. He had witnessed enough to know that some things defied rational explanation, and the Beaumont portrait was certainly one of them. A series of closed-door meetings followed, hushed and tense. The ethical dilemma was immense: how to handle an object that was both a historical artifact of considerable value and a source of undeniable terror. Preserving it for art history was one thing. Knowingly exposing the public to a malevolent entity was another entirely. The curator, Evelyn, vehemently argued against ever returning the painting to public display. Her voice, usually calm and academic, was now edged with a raw conviction born of first-hand experience. She spoke of the painting's power to affect the mind, to replay trauma, and to unleash a darkness that no one could control. She described the face not as an image, but as a gateway, and the terrifying realization that Annalise's spirit might be as trapped and as malevolent as Arthur's. Ultimately, the decision was made. The Beaumont portrait would be removed from public display indefinitely. The official statement released to the press cited unforeseen conservation challenges and the need for extensive, long-term restoration work as reasons for its withdrawal. There was also a vague reference to its unsettling psychological impact on sensitive viewers, a subtle nod to the truth for those who might suspect more. The museum's reputation for housing a haunted artifact quickly spread through hushed whispers in the art world, adding a layer of macabre intrigue to its otherwise dignified image. Evelyn, deeply scarred by her experience, emerged fundamentally changed. The meticulous, logical art historian she once was had been shattered, replaced by a woman who now understood that the world held far more than what could be seen and catalogued. Her academic perspective on art had been irrevocably altered, replaced by a profound, chilling understanding of the unseen forces that could inhabit objects, especially those imbued with such intense human emotion and tragedy. She could no longer look at a painting merely as brushstrokes and pigment. She saw the stories, the lives, and sometimes the lingering spirits trapped within. She didn't abandon art history, but her focus shifted dramatically. She dedicated her life to studying the darker intersections of art, history, and the supernatural. She sought out other tales of cursed objects, of art pieces with unsettling pasts, of artists who seemed to capture more than just an image on canvas. Evelyn became a leading, albeit controversial, voice in a niche field, always aware that her knowledge came at a profound personal cost. She was forever haunted by the portrait, by Arthur's screams, and by Annalise's cold, unforgiving gaze. Sleep offered little respite, often bringing vivid, terrifying dreams that replayed fragments of the tragedy, keeping the memory of the cursed canvas alive in her mind. The portrait itself was sealed away. It was taken to a heavily secured, climate-controlled vault deep within the museum's archival facility, a place few ever visited. The vault was designed not just for preservation, but to contain. Thick steel doors, advanced environmental controls, and a sophisticated alarm system were installed, ostensibly to protect the valuable artwork, but in truth, to contain its malevolent energy. It was placed in a custom-built, opaque wooden crate, ensuring that no one could accidentally glimpse the hidden face again. It became a legend within the museum, a whispered tale among long-serving staff members. New employees were occasionally told the story in hushed tones, often accompanied by a nervous laugh, but always with a warning to never, under any circumstances, approach the vault where the Beaumont was kept. It was a cursed canvas, a silent testament to a forgotten tragedy and a dark secret that had been buried alive within art. Despite its isolation, the painting's influence was still felt. Occasional reports surfaced from the deepest parts of the archives. Flickering lights near the vault, faint whispers carried on non-existent drafts, and a pervasive, unnatural chill that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Security cameras would sometimes glitch in that sector, showing static or distorted images for brief moments. Janitorial staff reported an inexplicable sense of dread when assigned to clean the area. The painting, though unseen, continued to watch. The hidden face, with its burning, distorted eyes, remained a silent testament to Arthur's suffering and Annalise's guilt. It was an enduring power, a secret embedded in art, waiting to be rediscovered by those brave or foolish enough to look closer to truly see beyond the surface. The museum had contained the painting, but it could never truly silence the echoes of the past, forever bound to the cursed canvas.